Imagine this. You walk into a studio, ready to promote your latest project, only to find yourself at the center of a heated debate that escalates beyond anything you could have expected. Now picture that debate turning into an explosive showdown, one so intense that it forces you to walk off the set in the middle of a live broadcast, leaving everyone in the studio speechless. This wasn't a movie scene. This wasn't scripted drama. This was reality TV at its rawest. And it all went down when Tim Allen, a man famous for his unfiltered opinions, stepped into the lion's den of The View. He thought he was there for a simple, light-hearted chat. A few laughs, a few questions about his new project, and then back to his life. But instead, he found himself face-to-face with a confrontation that not only shocked the panel but also left the audience, and the world, watching in disbelief. Tim Allen, the beloved comedian who had been outspoken about Hollywood's culture for years, was about to reveal more than anyone expected. Before we get into the full breakdown of what happened that day, hit that subscribe button, and let us know in the comments. Do you think celebrities should be able to speak their minds freely on live TV? Or should there be limits? Because what you're about to witness is one of the most controversial moments in daytime television history. At first, everything seemed as it should. Tim Allen, known for his stand-up comedy and roles in hit TV shows like Home Improvement, entered the studio with that trademark smile, ready to promote his latest project. The atmosphere was light, the usual banter exchanged between Tim and the panel, and the audience was in good spirits. Whoopi Goldberg, as always, welcomed him with her characteristic warmth. It seemed like a simple segment, just another day on The View. For a few minutes, the show sailed smoothly. Whoopi asked Tim the usual questions about his new work, his career, and his personal life. Tim, always ready with a witty quip, made the studio audience laugh, just as they expected. There was nothing unusual in the air, yet, beneath the surface, something was brewing. The tension was subtle at first, something only those in the studio could feel, but it was there. Whoopi's questions, though polite, carried an edge. Her voice was steady but firm, and Tim's responses began to take on a slightly more guarded tone. It was clear. This wasn't just a promotional interview anymore. Something deeper was at play. Then Whoopi, ever the master of turning a conversation, began to shift gears. With a more serious look on her face, she asked the question that would turn the entire dynamic on its head. Tim, you've been very vocal about your political views over the years. You've made it clear how you feel about the entertainment industry and its culture. Do you still feel like you've been silenced in any way? I mean, you're here on this show right now. You've got a pretty big platform to speak your mind. The question was more than just curiosity. It was an accusation, a challenge. The air seemed to thicken as the audience leaned in, sensing a change in the tone of the conversation. Tim paused, his smile fading just slightly as he considered his words carefully. Tim Allen wasn't one to shy away from speaking his mind, especially on topics that were close to his heart. But this moment was different. There was something personal about the question, something that cut deeper than the usual promotional fluff. With a steady breath, Tim leaned forward, his gaze never leaving Whoopi's. "Well, Whoopi," he started, his voice calm but resolute. "I think there's a big difference between having a platform and actually being able to speak freely without facing major consequences." He let the words hang in the air for a moment, watching as Whoopi's expression hardened. "I've seen it happen. People's careers are destroyed, not because they aren't talented, but because they dared to voice an opinion that didn't align with the prevailing narrative. That's not freedom of speech, Whoopi. That's suppression." There it was, the word suppression, a charged term, one that immediately set the stage for what was to come. Whoopi didn't back down. She shook her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, a challenge in her gaze. "But Tim, that's not what I see," she replied, her tone rising slightly. "You've had success. You've worked on hit shows. You're here, sitting on The View, in front of a live audience. Where's the proof of this silencing you're talking about? If you're so silenced, why does it seem like you're being given every opportunity to speak?" Tim, never one to back down, didn't flinch. "Whoopi, it's not about the platforms I've had. It's about the price of using those platforms. You can have all the platforms in the world, but when speaking up means losing everything you've worked for, what good is that platform? The other co-hosts looked at each other uneasily, sensing the conversation was quickly slipping into murky waters. Whoopi, however, was ready for the challenge. The conversation quickly escalated as Whoopi pressed on. Tim, you've got to understand that there's a difference between facing criticism and being silenced. People face consequences for their actions every day. It's called accountability. It's not the same as being punished for speaking out. Tim's eyes flashed as he leaned further into the debate. Accountability is one thing, but what we're talking about here is a climate of fear. People are afraid to speak their truth, afraid that one wrong word, one misstep, could cost them everything. That's not accountability. That's control. The studio fell into an uncomfortable silence. The tone had shifted from casual banter to something much more intense. It was no longer just about Tim's career or opinions. It was about the very idea of free speech, the lines between what can be said and what should remain unsaid in today's climate. Whoopi, not backing down, raised her voice again. But Tim, people need to be accountable for their words. If you say something that hurts others, you can't expect no consequences. People have the right to protect themselves, to stand up against views that they think are harmful. Tim's expression grew more intense as he replied, I agree that people should be accountable. But when did we start punishing people for their opinions? When did we decide that one difference of thought means someone should lose everything? That's not about accountability. That's about erasure. The tension in the room was palpable. The audience, initially expecting light-hearted banter, was now silent, gripped by the rawness of the debate unfolding before them. The co-hosts shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Whoopi and Tim were locked in a verbal tug-of-war, neither willing to give an inch. Whoopi, her voice firm and unwavering, fired back one last time. Tim, you want to talk about fear, but what about the real fear that marginalized communities face every day? Fear isn't just about being criticized for your beliefs. Fear is about people in power using their voices to downplay systemic issues, to dismiss the lived experiences of others because it doesn't fit into their narrative. Tim, though clearly affected, didn't back down. I agree, Whoopi, I'm not dismissing that fear. But why is it that when someone like me tries to express concern about this climate of fear, I'm told I'm just playing victim? Why is it that some voices are heard while others are shut down simply for asking questions, for challenging the narrative? The back and forth continued, the conversation growing more heated, more raw, with every passing moment. But what was becoming clear was that this wasn't just a disagreement about political opinions or Hollywood culture. It was a reflection of the larger conversation happening across the country about free speech, fear, and the consequences of speaking out. As the heated exchange continued, it was clear that what began as a simple promotional interview had turned into something far more intense. The back and forth wasn't just about opinions anymore. It had become a matter of principles, a fight over what it means to truly speak out without repercussions. Whoopi, steadfast in her position, kept pushing her point, but Tim was equally resolute in defending his. You're saying people should be held accountable, Tim said, his voice steady but filled with resolve. But the question is, what are we holding people accountable for? One mistake? One differing opinion? How did we get to a place where a single comment, even if it's made with good intentions, can be used as a weapon to destroy someone's entire career? Where's the line between accountability and outright cancellation? Whoopi's face hardened as she responded. That's the issue, Tim. You're framing it like people are being silenced for no reason. But when you speak out against issues that affect marginalized groups, you can expect a response. People have the right to stand up for their communities. It's not about canceling anyone. It's about protecting those who need to be protected. Tim leaned in, his voice unwavering. But Whoopi, when does it stop? When does the line between accountability and protection blur into control? I'm not saying that people shouldn't stand up for what's right. But why does it seem like the moment someone says something controversial, they're immediately shut down? Why can't we have these difficult conversations without fearing that our careers will be over the second we step out of line? At this point, the room had gone silent. The usual banter and laughter were nowhere to be found. The audience was completely absorbed, their attention fixed on the heated exchange unfolding before them. The other co-hosts, who had been sitting comfortably in the background, were now visibly uncomfortable, trying to figure out how, or if, they should intervene. The producers in the control room were no doubt scrambling to adjust the flow of the conversation. But this moment was out of their control now. The next shift came when Whoopi, ever the direct force on the panel, dropped a bombshell. You talk about fear and silence. Tim, but what you're really doing is playing the victim card. You've had the privilege of success. Hell, you've had the privilege of being on TV for decades. You've got more opportunities than most people could ever dream of. And yet, you're sitting here, acting like you're the one who's being oppressed. This isn't about being silenced, Tim. This is about dealing with the reality of living in a world where not everyone agrees with you. The word privilege hit Tim like a slap in the face. His expression faltered for just a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He leaned forward, his voice becoming quieter but no less intense. That's the catch-all, isn't it? Privilege. Every time someone tries to have an honest conversation about the challenges they face, the moment they say something that isn't in line with what's politically correct, it's immediately brushed off as privilege. Tim's eyes narrowed. What happened to the idea of hearing people out, of letting them speak their truth? Just because my life looks a certain way doesn't mean I don't have my own struggles. My perspective is valid too. Whoopi didn't back down, her voice rising once again. But Tim, you've never been silenced. You've never had your voice taken away from you. You've always had the ability to speak your mind. What you're experiencing isn't silencing. It's people holding you accountable. And there's nothing wrong with that. Tim's voice cracked just slightly as he responded. That's where we're missing each other, Whoopi. I'm not saying I've been silenced in the way you might think. What I'm saying is that we've created an environment where having an opinion, any opinion that isn't the right opinion, leads to you being shut out. And that's what's wrong. The tension in the studio was now almost unbearable. The debate had moved from a simple discussion to a full-blown idea. As the conversation raged on, it became clear that both Tim and Whoopi were speaking from a place of deeply held beliefs. For Whoopi, the issue was about standing up for marginalized communities and calling out injustice when it was seen. For Tim, it was about the fear of losing personal freedom and the ability to voice dissenting opinions in a climate that increasingly seemed to punish anyone who stepped outside the norm. Tim took a deep breath, his voice now calmer but filled with a quiet frustration. You know, Whoopi, I respect you. I've admired your career, your ability to speak your truth, but I'm not asking for special treatment. All I'm asking for is the same respect, the respect to have my opinions heard without them being immediately dismissed as privilege or victimhood. And that's exactly what's happening right now. You're dismissing my concerns because they don't fit into the narrative you believe in. For the first time during the interview, Whoopi's expression softened slightly. There was a momentary pause as she processed his words. She looked at him, a flicker of understanding crossing her face, before she replied. I hear you, Tim. But it's hard to take seriously when you've had every opportunity in the world to be heard, and yet you're complaining about being silenced. That's what I don't get. Tim's response was measured, but it carried the weight of years of frustration. It's not about the opportunities, Whoopi. It's about the fear that comes with them. It's about the pressure to conform, to agree with everything that's popular, or risk losing it all. That's what's happening now. People are afraid to speak their minds, and that fear is real. The moment that had been building throughout the conversation finally reached its peak. Tim stood up slowly, his movements deliberate and calm. The studio watched in silence as he removed the microphone clipped to his shirt. Tim, where? Are you going? Whoopi asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and frustration. Tim didn't look back as he started walking toward the exit. I'm done, he said softly, but the weight of the words hung in the air. This conversation isn't going anywhere productive, and I'm not going to sit here and keep getting told that my concerns are invalid. I came here hoping for a real conversation, but instead, it's become something else entirely. I can't be a part of that." The rest of the panel looked on in shock, unable to process the reality of what was happening. The live studio audience sat in stunned silence as the cameras continued to roll. Whoopi, still sitting at the table, opened her mouth to respond, but Tim was already gone. As Tim exited the set, leaving Whoopi and the panel in stunned silence, the producers scrambled to figure out how to recover from the unexpected walkout. The cameras continued to follow Tim's departure, capturing every moment of what was now being called one of the most explosive and raw moments in daytime television history. The audience, both in the studio and at home, were left to process what they had just witnessed. This wasn't a staged controversy. It wasn't a planned moment for ratings. It was real, unfiltered, raw, and incredibly powerful. For Tim Allen, walking off the set wasn't just about avoiding an uncomfortable conversation. It was about standing up for his right to speak without fear. Whether you agree with him or not, one thing is certain. This moment will be talked about for years to come. So, what do you think? Was Tim right to walk off the set, or should he have stayed to finish the conversation? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We'll be bringing you more unforgettable moments from the entertainment world. No filters, no limits.